Can you tell us a bit about how a startup can kind of enter the Nvidia orbit?
That's the perfect way to phrase it because it needs to start from somewhere. How do we tell the story of NVIDIA enabled this startup to do something they couldn't do before or do it better than they were doing before? And now we want to go tell the rest of the world, you should be using that product because NVIDIA has stamped its tech approval to say that's good stuff under the hood. And this is going to be transformative to your industry.
That was Sydney Sykes, who leads global venture capital alliances and partnerships at Nvidia. But before joining Nvidia, Sydney spent years investing in startups at NEA and Lightspeed Ventures, while also co-founding Black VC, a nonprofit dedicated to expanding access to careers in venture capital. Today, she sits at the intersection of founders, investors, and one of the world's most influential AI companies, giving her a unique perspective on how startups can turn strategic partnerships into a competitive advantage. We talked about how founders can get on the radar of companies like Nvidia, the difference between corporate venture capital and traditional venture capital, and why strategic partnerships can be just as valuable as funding. I'm Isabelle Johannesen, and you're listening to Build Mode. This season, we're taking a look inside the fundraise. Hi, Sydney.
Hi, how's
How's
it
it going?
going? Oh, wow, Jinx, good. How are you?
Good. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm really excited to dig into sort of the corporate and VC angle of the funding ecosystem.
Yeah, I'm so excited to be here. I have been thinking about, hearing about, looking up to TechCrunch for the past decade plus, actually maybe close to 15 years. So being in this seat with you is so cool.
Wow, that's awesome to hear. So full circle for all of us.
Very full circle.
So let's start off with an introduction. You are currently at NVIDIA running their global VC alliances and partnerships, but you came from being a partner at Lightspeed Ventures, and you've also co-founded a VC alliance, specifically helping Black VCs to build up that ecosystem. So tell me a little bit in your own words, how has your journey gotten you to where you are now?
Yeah, I have spent the past decade of my career focused on the VC ecosystem in a lot of different ways. I started out as an investor at NEA, actually joined them as their first analyst, who kind of saw it from an interesting angle. While I was at NEA, I founded Black VC, which is a nonprofit focused on increasing Black representation in venture capital. And then most recently was at Lightspeed, but have spent time as an angel investor, as a scout. So I've really seen the VC perspective from investor, from community member, and now from the partnership side of things. I find that I just love the way that VCs are spending their time thinking about the future. And even more than that, I love spending my time thinking about how I can help startups and how I can contribute to that ecosystem and that future. So it's a journey where at the time I felt like I was jumping around, and now in hindsight, I'm like, wow, I feel so lucky that I got to spend so much time working with some of the most interesting companies and interesting people out there.
Yeah, wow, what a perspective you have from all of those different pivots in your career. So what about, what you're doing at NVIDIA today? Tell us about that.
Yeah, so I lead VC partnerships at NVIDIA. We have a program called the VC Alliance, which is a global network of venture capital firms that partner with NVIDIA to support their portfolio companies, to support the AI ecosystem more broadly, and to keep NVIDIA really closely tied to what are the most innovative trends and companies that are in the AI space right now. So my job is honestly a mix of things depending on what startups and VCs need to be successful. So one day I might be spending my time with a VC, helping them understand different trends that NVIDIA is investing in, maybe something like how physical AI is changing and what role Jetson chips play in that. Or maybe I'm spending my time with a specific startup, actually helping them fundraise and connect to investors. Or even, actually, I spend a lot of my time with internal NVIDIA groups, like product teams and vertical teams that are trying to figure out how they can work with startups and work with VC firms to be on the cutting edge of what's coming next.
Wow, so you really are in the epicenter of all things AI. And I guess from that vantage point, what are some of the trends that you are seeing? So both that NVIDIA is investing in, but also the founders that you are seeing, and also what you're hearing that your VC partners are investing in.
You're so right. It's all of those things.
Yeah.
I am really lucky and really challenged with the fact that NVIDIA is an incredibly diverse and horizontal company. So we have, I mentioned physical AI earlier. Physical AI is a priority for NVIDIA. We also have a retail team. We also have a team focused on agentic AI. We recently announced Nemo Claw. So those are like four totally different products and verticals, and I'm not even touching probably half to three quarters of what Nvidia does. And then on the flip side of that, when you look at the startup ecosystem, we have more than 38,000 startups in Inception. Those are not all agentic AI coding platforms. We've got startups that are doing, drug discovery using AI to discover new drugs that can solve diseases we never had cures for. We have startups that are doing robotics. We have startups that are doing consumer AI. It totally runs the gamut. So it's honestly hard for me to choose a specific topic that's really exciting because within each vertical, there are things that get me amped up. I will say right now, or over the past couple months, whenever I see one of these companies that's using AI to reinvent healthcare or to find new ways to solve health challenges, to drug discovery, all of those different opportunities, those are the ones that help me realize the impact of AI goes beyond just Silicon Valley, goes beyond just the startup ecosystem, and really touches all of these industries that are kind of the backbone of the US.
Hmm. Wow, it's I love that you put it like that because sometimes these things can feel really. I think a lot of the founders are so niche and into their specific lane, but kind of thinking of it all as this overarching, backbone of the U.S. And I think a lot of these ideas that even you just mentioned give me a lot of hope for the future, and it's always inspiring to meet these founders, but also just to hear that the VC ecosystem, the corporate ecosystem, are backing them and empowering them to build these technologies that are lighting us up.
Yeah, and each founder should be to a certain extent. Like the great thing about a founder is they are spending all of their time thinking about one specific really hard problem, and that's the only way that they're going to be able to solve it. That's the reason that Nvidia can't solve it, that Genentech can't solve it, that whatever large company you're talking about can't solve it, is because the founder is just spending so much time, has such a great expertise, is thinking about it from a different angle. And so, I think that's part of when these partnerships can be great. It's like Nvidia can go work with a startup to understand their perspective, their really deep perspective of a niche topic. And that startup can understand Nvidia's lens that's more strategic, that's the 30,000-foot level that kind of brings in the here's how you startup fit into this broader ecosystem and how we can work together.
Okay, I love that you said that because that was going to be my next question for you is really how can some of these startups plug in and, synergize with NVIDIA and partner with NVIDIA? I know there's, obviously the Inception program, you have a venture arm, you have VC alliances, and there's many ways that I know that you guys engage with startups and support the ecosystem. Can you tell us a bit about how a startup can kind of enter the NVIDIA orbit?
That's the perfect way to phrase it. How can a startup enter the NVIDIA orbit? Because it needs to start from somewhere. There's no partnership that starts at 100% or 60 miles per hour, or whatever analogy you want to
Starts with
use.
an acquisition.
Starts with an acquisition. It's just never going to
Founder's
happen.
wish.
I do get an email once in a while that's like, "Hi, Sydney, nice to meet you. Like, I'd like to be acquired by NVIDIA." I'm like, "Okay, well,
Sure you would.
not just that, but like, why?
Yeah.
What's the strategic alignment here?" So to go back to your original question, the front door for startup partnerships really is Inception. It's a great place to not just get all of the resources that we have to offer to help startups succeed, but also to figure out what are NVIDIA's priorities. Because if a company like NVIDIA, if any corporate is going to partner with a startup, there needs to be that strategic alignment there. And luckily for startups and luckily for NVIDIA, there's a lot of companies that are strategically aligned to NVIDIA. If you are enabling any company, any industry to use AI more, that's a mission we can really get behind. That means when you're successful, we're successful. And then there are startups that are really, over the top relevant or just extremely strategic to us. Maybe they're enabling companies to use NVIDIA chips at a much more optimal level. Maybe they're enabling lower latency, lower costs, better agentic performance. Maybe they're enabling a use case that didn't exist before. Those are the companies where we don't just want to know what you're doing, we want to help you do it. And Inception and NVIDIA has a bunch of free SDKs, libraries, resources to help those companies be successful. And from there, from that first understanding, that first technical enablement, then you go to the deeper partnership. And I think the best way to think about that is, how do we tell a better together story? How do we tell the story of NVIDIA enabled this startup to do something they couldn't do before, or do it better than they were doing it before? And now we want to go tell the rest of the world, you should be using that product because NVIDIA has stamped its tech approval to say that's good stuff under the hood, and this is going to be transformative to your industry.
So how many startups-ish get that stamp of approval?
Oh my gosh, I don't even think there's a number, because that kind of partnership is so different for each company. I think if you were to look at any company, any startup that we're working with really closely, it would look totally different from another company.
But does that partnership look like an investment, a check, or what is that how does it take shape?
It doesn't usually look like an investment, because ventures only invest in so many companies a year. And there's a lot of startups that we want to be successful. I think it looks like it starts with Inception membership, and then it looks towards deep technical enablement. Are you using our technology? Can we help you with some of these free resources, libraries, SDKs? And then it looks generally like a partnership with an aligned team. So let me just go deeper into that, because I didn't understand this before I joined NVIDIA. If a startup wants to work with a corporate, it's really important that they figure out what their priorities are and align themselves. So if you are, I keep going back to these drug discovery examples, but if you're a drug discovery company and you're doing something really interesting, there may be something on the robotics side. Like, you may be using robotics in the lab, but truly your alignment is going to be with the healthcare team. And you're going to want to understand, what does NVIDIA's healthcare team care about? And how do I position myself so that they know that I have the same goals and I want to push that mission forward when I'm working with pharma companies or hospitals or whatever it is. So I think it's really important for startups to not just come with the perspective of having great technology, having a great mission. Those two things are table stakes, but also coming with the perspective of, I understand what your priorities are and I'm aligned with them.
Okay. But so, I mean, even taking a step behind that or back from that, how does a startup even kind of get on the radar? Of course, NVIDIA through Inception, but in general, in your experience, kind of with the broader world of corporate startup partnerships, how does a startup even become, noticeable to some of these large corporates?
Yeah, for us, it's Inception. There are a couple other companies that have startup programs as well. There's probably two avenues. A lot of companies will have a startup or innovation team, ecosystem, org. That can be really good because it can give a holistic perspective of the organization with one starting point. So maybe think of that as like kind of a department store. You can go and you can see everything and you can decide, like, okay, this is where I belong. On the flip side of that is more of a grassroots bottoms up approach of finding the product team or the vertical team that's relevant to you. So there's a few products within NVIDIA, or there's a few products that teams within NVIDIA use that came because they were just such great products. So some of the software development tools or the coding assistants. And then you kind of, you get buy-in from the product team or the vertical team that's relevant to you, and kind of work backwards or work upwards to a broader partnership. I think there's pros and cons to both. If you get to the best partnerships, they probably have both. They probably have a connection to the innovation department or the startup department, and also a connection to the most relevant product and vertical teams. The advice I will give to startups is to do their research as much as possible. For example, GTC is a great way to learn about which teams and which priorities might be right for that startup within NVIDIA. So if you're a physical AI startup, you can go to the physical AI sessions and you can hear Deepu or Amit or Les Carpus or one of these people talking about the priorities that NVIDIA has, the tech that might be relevant to them, the kinds of partnerships we're having, and base their how to position themselves to NVIDIA around that. I think a lot of other companies have that as well.
Google
Reinvent,
Next.
Google Next,
Yeah.
exactly. Those are a really good way to just go and absorb and figure out where you could fit within a corporate.
Yeah, I mean, hear straight from the horse's mouth and network and, be in the middle of it. So, obviously with your vantage point being in the middle of the VC ecosystem and the corporate ecosystem, what weight does carrying an official stamp from Nvidia or, one of your, competitors or counterparts at one of the other big tech companies, what weight does that really carry in the VC ecosystem? Is that kind of an immediate unlock for a VC to write a check, or is it becoming more commonplace for startups to have relationships with corporates? Where are you seeing that trend?
There are no golden tickets, but it is a great signal. It's a signal that you are not that the company is not just interesting, not just a project in a garage, but is really relevant to the customer that they're going after. Every VC is gonna do their own research. I think it's probably notorious at this point that VCs say no more than they say yes. But it is important to a VC and to a company's success, really, to show that they are listening to their customers and that they're rooted in real problems and real customer needs. So I hope that answers your question. I don't think there's a golden ticket, like I said, but it goes a really long way to have those customer logos. And also, those customer logos are going to be really helpful to get in the door of other customers or CVCs, because it adds that stamp of credibility and also that enterprise readiness. Because a lot of companies, especially a lot of startups, are not ready to handle all of the compliance issues and structural issues that come with having an enterprise customer.
Yeah, yeah. And I guess, is it sort of a chicken and egg problem? But right, you're working with VCs to help them discover sometimes early stage companies, but also looking at the companies that they have uncovered and kind of where does this cycle start and where does it end?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I wonder if you can't even think about it as a cycle because it's so many different parallel lines happening at once. There we want to know the trends that VCs are seeing. We want to know the interesting companies that they're investing in. And at the same time, we, Nvidia Inception, have our own incredible network of startups that we know are doing interesting things because we're in the tech with them and we want to help them be successful, and fundraising is part of that. So it's like both things are happening simultaneously. And I think part of that is because our vantage point is so broad and horizontal. So there may be a startup that's doing something really interesting in one space, and that doesn't conflict with the fact that there are 1,000 other startups that we also want to partner with and work with. Jensen was on a podcast recently, and he said that we don't pick winners, we pick leaders. And I think that's very true for Inception. So we're always looking for who's the leader in the space. And VCs tell us about who are the leaders, and startups tell us themselves that they're the leaders, and we get behind that too.
Yeah, interesting. To some extent, I feel like our vantage points are a little bit similar in the way that we sit between the startups and the VCs, right? So a lot of it is showcasing startups that we find that the VCs may have not discovered yet, and also finding companies that the VCs have discovered and giving them access and a spotlight and, whatever it is that we can offer with our respective companies.
Yeah, that's so true. And there are trends that, dare I say, Nvidia is ahead of VCs sometimes.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah.
And there are definitely trends where the VCs are ahead of Nvidia. So, for example, I've been hearing more and more VCs talking about data center infrastructure. 5 years ago, if you had told a VC that there was a startup in data center infrastructure, I think 99% of them would have said that that's outside my mandate. I have no interest in that. So sometimes we are trying to educate the VC about what we're specifically seeing in the market. But a lot of times we're listening to them because there's a lot that they're seeing that we don't get exposed to.
I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about some of your other experiences. So you co-founded the Black VC to address who gets access to venture capital. But now you're in one of the most powerful, arguably the most powerful AI company, building partnerships with VCs. So I'm wondering how your view on access and gatekeeping in venture capital has changed.
My role now and my experience founding and running Black VC are surprisingly similar. My experience with Black VC was very much thinking about how venture can be very concentrated within a few number of firms. The amount of capital, the access to deal flow can be very concentrated within a few number of firms and even within a few regions. And trying to advocate for opening the industry and giving more access to investors who otherwise wouldn't have an opportunity to enter it. On the flip side, now my experience with Nvidia, we have more than 1,000 VCs in the Venture Capital Alliance. So we're not just paying attention to VC firms in Silicon Valley or VC firms on Sand Hill Road. We want to see the perspective of the VC firm in South Dakota who's spending all day, every day thinking about industrial physical AI in the US. And we want to spend a lot of time with the VC firm in Boston who knows everything about drug discovery or healthcare. And I've realized, maybe even more so now than when I was running Black VC, that in order for the startup ecosystem to survive and really to succeed, it needs to have that diversity of perspective. And in order for NVIDIA to keep being at the forefront of what's going on, we need to understand what all of those VCs are thinking about. So access is probably even more important to me now than I realized when I was a VC at one of the largest VC firms sitting on Sand Hill Road.
But I imagine you built Black VC because you saw who was being left out of venture. And I'm wondering if, this AI boom has made that better or worse.
It's a bit early to tell. I think the thing that's heartening about AI is that it's easier than ever to build a company. And it's easier than ever to build a company with traction and to test things out and for lower cost. So the friends and family round used to be a real barrier to underrepresented groups getting into entrepreneurship. The idea of leaving your well-paying job in order to start a company that takes hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars, made entrepreneurship really inaccessible for a lot of people. And then you need to hire, and then you da-da-da, on and on and on. That barrier to entry for entrepreneurship has dropped. I think we're heading into a wave of entrepreneurship that we're all going to be knocked over by. This tsunami of entrepreneurship. On the flip side, I don't think we can close our eyes to historic challenges. VC funding in particular has been very network driven. But I do think that if VCs don't open their eyes to new types of founders, they're going to miss out on great opportunities. And candidly, I think we've already seen that. When I was in venture, or let's take when I was starting out in venture in 2016, every VC firm was looking for a repeat founder who had already exited a company, hopefully had already exited 3 companies, CEO title 3 times. And if you were, a technical founder, it's like, okay, well, where's your CEO type? And now we're looking at some of the founding teams getting funded. It's 2 researchers who have been, coding away for the past 5 years and come up with something incredible that's gone viral, and that's going to be the #1 company in demand. So that's already a different perspective. I hope we'll see even more of that openness to just great products that really address an important problem being the ones who get funded.
Let's hope so. I mean, I think, we're also seeing
Doesn't sound that crazy, right?
It doesn't sound that crazy, and I'm here for it. We're seeing still that archetype of founder of, the Stanford dropout and, like you said, the second, third time founder that still is not representative of, the founder that I think we'd all, like to be rooting for. And because investors need to be looking in more diverse pools of talent to be able to find these up and coming AI companies, as you said. And yet I feel like we're still kind of closing in many ways on the same circles that people have been looking historically.
I think that's really fair. One thing that'll be interesting to see is historically Like I mentioned, you have a lot of VC firms that would invest in second, third time founders. And so there's kind of, you can think of it as a pool of founders, and you're drawing from the pool. And if you know a founder who started a company once, let's look out for them the next time, and da 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 da. And so that pool grows a little bit, but not a lot. If you are then opening up this new pool of researchers or of college dropouts or whatever it is, that is probably going to be accessible to a new VC network. If I've been fishing over here for a long time, and apologies for people who are listening, if I've been fishing in pool A and pool B is where all the cool founders are from, that's giving a new chance for new VCs to rise up because they have unique access to founders.
That's interesting. And so I imagine that's what you are curating with Black VC. And how do you go about fostering the next wave of investors?
Two things I think are really key. One is network and community. A company is not built by a single person. Usually not built by a single person. Definitely if you're a VC, it's not built by a single person. You need the investor for that current round. You need the investor for the next round. You need the advisors. You need the corporate partners, on and on and on. And so it's really important for the Black VC community to be a community, to be a network. The second thing is the education side of things. We've seen with different trends over time that different groups have fallen behind because they weren't keeping an eye out. I'm sure there are VCs who missed a lot of Gen AI companies because they just weren't educated about everything that was going on in the AI ecosystem. So with Black VC, we spend a lot of time on education. We have a Black Venture Institute, which is a program solely focused on helping operators build that VC skill set, and now increasingly how they think about companies in the age of AI. For VC Alliance, it's actually quite similar. We have a lot of content, webinars, workshops to help guide VCs through thinking about these new industries. We did run around physical AI a few months back. We actually did one relatively recently on the neo cloud space and CSPs as well, because this is a new trend where portfolio companies are going to VCs asking, how should I think about neo clouds versus CSPs? So education is just sort of a nonstop journey, whether you're talking about specifically underrepresented groups or if you're thinking about VC overall.
I mean, operational question here. How do you do that? Is it in the form of webinars? Are you sending out newsletters? Like how, I think there's so much content and in the world of education, because, for many, there's a lot of entities out there who are trying to educate and spread the message, but I think people are overloaded with some of the digital content. How have you guys hacked that?
I know. We try to meet people where they're at.
Yeah.
So for some people, the webinar is great. It's a great place to ask questions, to go really deep, to have access to a technical expert you otherwise wouldn't have. For others, our newsletter is a great way to just monthly get a digest. What is Nvidia thinking about? But I found one of the most impactful ways to help educate VCs is just through examples. Like, what are the companies in their portfolio doing with Nvidia? How does that relate to other companies in their portfolio? So it's a little bit of education. It's a little bit of discussion. It's a little bit of, down in the weeds of the portfolio. We are honestly just classic Nvidia way, doing whatever we can to tackle the problem.
Getting creative and get your hands dirty, huh?
Always get your hands dirty at Nvidia.
I love it. So, I mean, you have a very unique front row seat to this AI boom. Is there anything that you are concerned about or alarmed by that people aren't necessarily talking about, or something that we should be paying more attention to?
The one I will focus on is AI does require a fair amount of energy. So do we have the energy to fuel this new industry? Like when you're talking about creating a new industry, I think we forget because it's been so long that there's been such a huge industry pop up in the US, but it requires a lot of energy and investment. And so I think we need to keep investing in that. And even for VCs, I think there's an opportunity to look at companies and look at sectors that touch energy, because right now that is such a booming space. So that's one. The other thing I'll say is I think there's been a lot of narrative around, this pessimistic perspective of AI. And what I am seeing in the day to day is that my colleagues who are using AI are busier than ever. Are you feeling this way?
I mean, yes and no. I feel like we're still kind of in a learning and sort of, upskilling phase of the AI around here, but,
I am at night, like bringing my computer next to my bed so I can like keep telling Claude to keep
yeah.
going. And I'm telling my husband, just one more query. It's really quite embarrassing. Um, but I have not yet said, Sydney, it's time for you to retire.
So, Sydney, you have had many diverse experiences across the VC ecosystem, from traditional VC to corporate world of VC. I'm curious if we can kind of break down a little bit for founders maybe listening, the difference between the procurement angle where a startup might become a customer or, working closely with the corporate versus corporate venture capital for maybe long-term strategic investment versus traditional venture capital.
Yeah, the worlds of procurement, partnership, corporate venture capital are often pretty intertwined. Corporate venture capital firms are usually taking a strategic approach. So they're not just going to ask you for your deck, ask you for your cap table and your deal room, and then say, I'm going to go do the diligence. I'll talk to you later. Usually what they're going to do is they're going to go talk to the relevant product teams, the potential customer within the corporate, and they're going to get a sense for, would we actually use this? How does this affect our company's priorities down the line? Um, and at the same time, you might have the reverse of you start working with a specific team within a corporate, and then the strategic nature builds over time to where they say, we want to get much more deeply involved. We want to have a stake in the future of this company. And then there's going to be some corporate venture firms that care about an industry overall, and they're looking to invest in multiple companies in that industry. So say they have a specific sector that they really want to exist, or a specific type of technology they really want to exist. So they're meeting with multiple companies in that space and maybe even investing in multiple companies in that space. So it's not going to be the same process as with a institutional venture firm where they are looking at your data, looking at your customers, making a decision for financial success. Yes, no. I think that's one of the great things about having the corporate venture perspective is it almost it's almost more rooted in today. What is this company doing today? Are they actually relevant to us? How are they affecting the industries today? And what is the potential down the line? Versus the financial or institutional venture firm, they are looking at how big could this get? It's more of a like dream big, hit it out of the park, or maybe die trying. It's a very different approach. So you kind of need both. And I would encourage founders to think about both perspectives when they're building their cap table. They're usually not going to just want one. They're usually going to want a institutional venture firm that's seen a lot of different companies over time, seen them fail, seen them succeed, is spending all day, every day looking at the broader market. And they might also want a corporate venture firm that's giving them really deep insight into what their customer cares about and what their specific industry is doing.
Yeah, I love that. I was thinking sort of like the institutional VC being the dreamer and the corporate VC being the realist, and kind of the balance of those two, telling you to think big versus like, how can you get this done today? Because, of course, often the corporate VC comes with some support in the way of, using Nvidia chips or using some of the operational, support that they have. I'm curious if corporate venture capital, in your experience, often comes with more strings attached. Is there usually kind of an expectation that they are working together, that traditional venture capital can be more hands off?
Corporate venture capital firms can look really different. You have some that are very financially minded. You have some that are extremely implementation minded, and then everything in between. I would say that every corporate venture firm cares, at least to some extent, about how strategically relevant the company is. And that's the benefit to the company, right? Like if you're gonna choose to include a corporate venture firm on your cap table, yes, you should care about the investor and their specific perspective. But you should also care about how will this help you align more closely with the industry you care about or the customer you care about or the potential partnership. So I think if a startup is going into a relationship with a corporate venture firm saying, I hope to have as little relationship with you as possible, like give me the money and walk away, I actually think that's a really big miss.
Oh yeah, I would think so too. I'm curious if you think that potentially if a startup has both a CVC and an institutional investor on their cap table, if the CVC carries more weight in terms of decision making. I'm picturing that maybe it's potential acquisition target or, something that it can help them actually scale in a different way that an institutional VC could, and therefore they would be more aligned with them. Have you ever seen something like that play out?
They both have such different roles. And, to be honest with you, I once heard a VC say, and I agree with you, I agree with them. A VC isn't going to be the reason you IPO, and they're not going to be the reason you die. And I think that's true for corporate VCs as well. So with corporate VCs, they can help you land another customer. Maybe they can even help you land a bunch of customers. Maybe they can lend you an incredible amount of credibility. On the other hand, an institutional venture firm can be instrumental in the way that they help you fundraise or attract talent or signal to the market. Or maybe the advice they give you is just like transformational and buys you a couple more months or even saves you from the brink of death.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, I think it's really important for the startup to construct their cap table, not as like a zero-sum game, but almost like painting a picture or putting a puzzle all together. There's going to be a lot of different pieces, and you want to augment what your team doesn't have with the investors you put on your cap table.
I love that visualization of painting a picture of a cap table.
Yeah.
All the different strengths. That's great. From a practical perspective, do you think there's any difference in the pitch itself to a CVC versus an institutional investor?
Ooh, that's a really good question. Yes, I think there is. I think there is because the focus of the institutional VC versus the corporate VC is a bit different. When the VC goes and writes their memo, it's going to be about financials, team background, market size, risks, da 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 da. The corporate venture firm is going to have all of that and strategic relevance to the company. So if you leave the first meeting and the CVC goes, yeah, I think they're going to be huge, but they're not relevant to us at all. They're not going to sign the check. So I think it's really important to show for the company to show how they think about the market, how they think about that better together story of what the corporate and the startup can do together, as well as to cover all the other bases of like being a great company with a great founder.
But from your perspective, having been again on the corporate side and on the institutional side, it almost sounds like it takes a different type of investor, a different type of person to be working. I know you're not on the actual corporate venture capital team for Nvidia, but just putting yourself in that perspective of the type of investor who's working with a corporate versus an angel investor or an institutional investor. How would you kind of like, if you were going to put some not personality traits, but almost archetypes of founders into these categories? I'm just curious.
Of investors,
Yeah.
archetypes of investors. I think first of all, a lot of corporate VCs start out as institutional VCs. A lot of institutional VCs sometimes start out as corporates. So there definitely is a back and forth. But there is a core difference to the job. When I'm speaking with corporate VCs, they are telling me all about what their product teams care about and what their vertical teams care about. Like they know what this team, which startups this team worked with, what they worked on together. So in many ways, it's a lot more, it's honestly a lot more collaborative because you need the company, you need the startup to be plugged in throughout the organization. You need to understand what the organization cares about and how to get that company plugged in. On the institutional venture side, you still need to convince other investors that this is a good deal, but it's not necessarily the same level of plugged in as you need to be with a bunch of different departments and teams within your corporation.
Okay, and then to sort of wrap up a little bit, I would love to get your advice for founders who are out there listening that may aspire to work with the likes of Nvidia and kind of get into more of the corporate ecosystem? It's hard to stand out. It's hard to get the attention. What would you advise them if they're really building from, the pretty early stages now? What should they focus on if that's one of their goals?
First things first, be first principles driven. Focus on solving a hard problem that's relevant to a specific industry and don't chase trends. Just really focus on building the best product that is highly relevant and that not everyone could do. I think especially right now, there's new opportunities popping up everywhere. There's new trends, there's new challenges. But it's really important if you want to be a surviving long-term company to understand a specific problem as deeply as you can. And then from there, it's about figuring out all of the next steps. Who do you need on your cap table to be successful? What kinds of customers would resonate with this? What resources can we get from a program like Inception or from another organization so that we don't have to build them ourselves or we don't have to go find them ourselves? But it all comes from the problem that you're solving and just being laser focused on that.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Sydney, so much for coming in and chatting with us. You have a lot of valuable insights, and your perspective is really unique. So thank you for sharing that with us.
It was great to be here. Seriously, dream come true to be involved with TechCrunch in this way.
Build Mode is a TechCrunch podcast. Each episode is produced and edited by Maggie Nye and hosted by me, Isabelle Johannesen. Our art and design is also by Maggie Nye. A big thanks to Morgan Little, who leads our audience development, the Foundry and Cheddar video teams, and most of all to you, the builders, and everyone else in the wider startup community. We'll see you back here next time.